On today's show, the federal government is requiring federal workers to be vaccinated or to stay home without pay. Is this a reasonable approach to increasing vaccination? Also, the upcoming municipal election is about more than electing new councillors. On the ballot are questions about going to permanent daylight savings time and getting rid of the equalization system. We'll look at those issues and more. This is Pinhole Talk Radio. Welcome to the show. My name is Brian Constantine. I am here with my co-host, Michael Rowland.
Hello.
So recently, Justin Trudeau announced that his government is going to be instituting a mandatory vaccination policy. And so if you are work for the government, if you are a contractor with the government, there's a good chance that you are going to be required to be vaccinated or forced into unpaid leave of absence. And don't expect any employment insurance to help you because that will not be available for you as well. Along with this policy of mandatory vaccination is mandatory vaccinations for all travelers on federally regulated industries such as planes, trains, boats. And that goes for, that's not just international travel. That's if you want to travel anywhere in Canada on those through those means. And so this is all with kind of the facade, at least, of trying to compel those who have chosen not to be vaccinated to this point. Now, that motivation seems is well enough by itself, if that were the case. Though I think later on Trudeau mentions a few things that would be of more concern, perhaps in the long term, regarding his motivations for this kind of policy. During the press conference, he mentions his justifications here by, as I quote, "These travel measures, along with mandatory vaccination for federal employees, are some of the strongest in the world because when it comes to keeping you and your family safe, when it comes to avoiding lockdowns for everyone, this is no time for half measures." Now, I don't know about you, but whenever I hear the government promising to keep me safe, it makes me a little nervous. I don't know about you. It doesn't give me the warm, comforting feeling that I'm thinking he's trying to entice me with. Now, he continues. He says, Trudeau continues to say, "If you've done the right thing and gotten vaccinated," he uses the word "gotten." Sorry, I can't get past that. Gotten vaccinated, you deserve the freedom to be safe from COVID, to have your kids safe from COVID, to get back to the things you love. So here I got some thoughts on this. He mentions that these restrictions are here to keep your family safe, your kids safe from COVID. Now, here I thought vaccines have been available for everyone over 12 for a few months now. So it would seem the onus now on who has the need to protect who is on individuals to protect themselves. Yeah. And it would seem that as soon as the vaccinations were rolled out, and especially as people got vaccinated, this would mean that the government should back off more and more, particularly at a federal level on such a big scale. Perhaps on a provincial level, we can talk about that, whether or not there's reason there. But at least, especially on a federal level, on such a huge scale. It would seem that as vaccinations were taken up, that's what our main protection was going to come from.
That's what you would think. That's kind of what they promised. And then as the vaccines came out, now you notice that shift to keeping your kids safe, because now the large majority of the adults are vaccinated. They have the protection of the vaccine. So now you're left with what's the last point of fear that can be called upon. And so now they're calling on the kids who up to this point under 12 couldn't be vaccinated.
Yeah, and so you end up with a policy that I think is just overly broad, and it really just undercuts this whole argument for what vaccines were actually were marketed
Yeah.
as this way of getting back to normal. And yet here, if that was the case, then what's the need for this policy? Um, it doesn't seem like if 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 the vaccinated are protected, it would seem there's little need for the vaccinated to be isolated from the unvaccinated through public policy.
Yes.
And that's basically what's going on here. If it seems to say that if I want to travel on a plane, um, the government has to come in and protect me from the person who's unvaccinated. And notice that this is just unvaccinated. It's not that this is an unvaccinated symptomatic person.
Yes.
So this isn't contingent upon your actual health situation. It's just the fact that you are not vaccinated, which should not be this not treated this. It should not be treated the same as COVID positive, which a lot of politicians are doing nowadays.
Yes. Yeah.
If you're not vaccinated, you have COVID essentially, or at least that's how we must treat you. And so therefore, you become kind of the unclean class, and you can't partake in normal society. And so we are going to kind of shun you off to the side here. But that doesn't seem to be fit with what we were promised with these vaccines. And so, how does this really truly make the nation safer by threatening people's jobs and freedom of travel if they're not vaccinated? The people who are vaccinated are already protected from them. It doesn't. There's just something that doesn't jive here. It seems like there would have to be at least. I would like to see some justification from the government whenever they do this.
Yeah, that's what's missing is the data and the justification. They are forming these policies seemingly based on emotion and public sentiment a lot more than the data that is available. I'm not finding the data that supports these decisions.
Yeah, the Canadian Constitution, the Constitution, the very first point, it says the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms guarantees the rights and freedoms set out in it, subject only to reasonable limits prescribed by law, as can be demonstrably justified in a free and democratic society. So all these freedoms that are laid out in the Constitution, if they are to be infringed upon, they have to be done with demonstrable justification. It has to be shown that this is the reasonable way, that this is a reasonable approach to doing it. And yet, this mandatory vaccination, first of all, like I said, the vaccine itself is meant to be a protection, but then this mandatory vaccine requirement is going to apply also to let's see here, to anyone who is going to work either in person or remotely. So you could be you could stay at home and still be required to be vaccinated.
Yeah, it's about who you work for, not about keeping your coworkers safe or the industry you work in safe. It's all about the fact that you work for the federal government and they just want a blanket statement of all of them need to have it.
And so if this policy was solely about protecting the public health system, as we've been told, why not create these caveats? Why not create this space for people who have reasonable who've reasonably chosen not to become vaccinated this time? If they can be accommodated to work from home, why not do that? That would seem to infringe the least upon the rights of these people and still allow them to function in society. And and yet it goes much it goes far broad. Like I said, this is such a broad policy, that I don't see how it can be justified by saying this is required for public health. There's
Yeah.
clearly situations in here where the person who's working from home, unvaccinated, is no threat to the public health system, um, and it's certainly not in a way that's going to be rectified by this kind of overreaching policy. The other part of it, is that Trudeau states that you deserve the freedom to be safe from COVID. Um, yeah, to kind of requote him here, it says, if you've done the right thing and gotten vaccinated, there's that word again, you deserve the freedom to be safe from COVID. Now here, I think 2 points to be made. First, again, this protection from COVID was what we were promised with the vaccines. And so if the vaccines are what provides us, quote, this freedom from COVID, then these restrictions are simply unnecessary. But I think it's kind of the other element of this that makes it more worrisome, is that this freedom from COVID, if that is the goal, if the goal is freedom from COVID, it sets up a justification that would allow the government to keep restrictions in place permanently.
Yes. Yeah.
There's just how can you promise to keep someone free from a virus, particularly one that spreads like COVID does? It a lot of these restrictions and vaccine passports are being put in place with the promise that these are just temporary for now. And yet, with this kind of justification, freedom to be safe from COVID, like I don't. It almost envisions a world in which somehow this is eradicated, and yet we look at it. These vaccines do not act in the same way as, say, the vaccines for measles.
Yeah.
Work. It just does not work on that kind of scale. We see people getting breakthrough cases. Recent report showed that the prevention ability of these vaccines wanes over time. So the antibodies that are produced by the vaccine decline over time. And so while the ability of the vaccine to prevent, say, severe reactions to the presence of the virus seems to hold, the fact that it's not as preventative of actually contracting the virus in the first place means that this is probably not going anywhere.
No, we're gonna have to learn to live with it, not eradicate it. I think a lot of countries have admitted that point now, where the goal is no longer zero COVID. The goal is to manage the COVID.
Yes.
And policies like this seem to still stem from the idea of eradicating. When you're trying to coerce that final few percent of people to get the vaccine, you're acting as though once they've got it, then we're good. Then this is over.
Yeah, the policy doesn't seem to work with that framework, because apparently the vaccinated have to be protected from the unvaccinated.
Yeah, and that's where it seems to contradict itself. You're acting as though you can eradicate it by getting those final few people vaccinated, but those who are vaccinated need to be protected from the unvaccinated. So clearly the vaccine does not prevent the transmission. So where are we left? We're now left in a situation where the vaccine both does and doesn't work, or does and doesn't do what's promised.
Mm-hmm. And so if the goal here is if the government is putting these policies in place with the goal of granting us freedom from COVID, this makes it a perpetual thing. And you're seeing boosters come out soon. It's very easily conceived that this policy is going to just be rolled over into the fact where, well, okay, now you need 3 shots. Now you need a fourth shot to qualify.
Regular annual boosters or something to that effect, where if you are going to be employed by the federal government or federal industries or even private companies are doing the same thing, you're going to see the requirement for regular booster shots.
Yeah, and so what ends up happening is it creates this permanent second-class citizen who can't work for the government and increasingly can't work for many private companies. No longer are they allowed to travel through planes and trains. They really do become a subclass of society, really a shunned element.
Yes,
and that just cannot be a healthy condition for a society.
No, that does not lead to a good nation.
Yeah. All right. So October 18th, as we move on, is not just municipal election day. It's also a referendum day here in Alberta. While selecting your next council, the province is also asking for your opinion on two matters, equalization and daylight saving time. The daylight saving time question it's pretty straightforward, and when you go into the poll and look at the ballot, it's going to ask you to answer yes or no on this question: do you want Alberta to adopt year-round daylight saving time, which is summer hours, eliminating the need to change our clocks twice a year? And so, if this was passed, if this question receives more yeses than nos, the Alberta legislature will be required to do away with the spring and winter time changes, leaving us on summertime all year. This would mean that we would be on the same time as Saskatchewan year round, and kind of a bit strangely, we would be 1 hour ahead of BC from March to November, but 2 hours ahead during the winter months. At least until they themselves change their time, which they seem to be likely heading towards in the near future. Now, I didn't have much of an opinion either way on this issue, at least until I started looking into this more closely.
Yeah, honestly I liked the sound of losing the time changes in the spring and fall. I'm all for not having that nuisance, and yeah, that would be spectacular. But until recently and actually reading about it, I didn't really give it any thought. Once you realize some of the implications of, especially sticking with the daylight saving time, the summer hours, there's some pretty serious implications into the fall and winter months.
Did you ever sense that tiredness from the time change? Did you ever feel off?
Maybe a little bit. I've never really, at least as an adult, I've never really thought much about it. I've never felt that it makes that much difference. It's just a bit of a pain, and probably don't take advantage of the changes the way I should. It's more when you come to the adding an hour instead of getting an extra hour of sleep, you just say, oh, I can stay up an hour later. So you don't really benefit from it in that way. And on the opposite end, I probably don't go to bed any earlier to make up for it either, but you get by. It doesn't really change a whole lot.
Yeah. To me, the fall back always meant like another hour of movie watching at night.
Yeah, exactly. It's just an extra bit to your evening.
Yeah, and so and especially now with the phones, they with them automatically changing. The most difficult thing about the time change for me was, trying to figure out how to change the oven or the microwave clock or something like that.
Or finding the clocks you forgot you had.
Yeah,
you're searching around your house. So did I get them all? I can't even remember anymore.
Yeah. And so, I didn't, it wasn't a huge deal to me. And so I think a lot of people probably just go into this question thinking the same way. It would be nice not to have to change the clocks twice a year. And, maybe for some people, they might feel a little more tired at that spring ahead or something like that. But ultimately, I don't, it seemed when we look at it, it's really a minor inconvenience. But now when kind of this whole idea, let's see, this whole idea of daylight savings times, it kind of is popularly attributed to Benjamin Franklin, and he kind of suggested it as a way to save on candles. You know, you don't have to burn them so late into the morning. But I think more interestingly, the first serious proposal for daylight saving time was presented in 1895 by George Hudson. He was a New Zealander, and he wanted more hours after work, at least more daylight hours after work, in order to collect and examine bugs and insects. He was an entomologist, and so he made his proposal to I think it was the Wellington Philosophical Society, arguing for extra hours in the afternoon. Now, perhaps more relevant to Albertans, I think they would understand the case presented by William Willett. He was an Englishman who argued a few years later for more daylight savings, or for more daylight hours in the afternoon, at least in part because he wanted more time to finish his evening golf round. He was upset by the fact that dusk would always cut into his game.
Talk about selfish motivations.
Yeah, but I think you find a lot of support nowadays.
Yeah.
You know, in a very Canadian way, I think it's incumbent upon me to point out that Canada owns the distinction of having the very first city to adopt daylight saving time. Port Arthur, Ontario, on July 1st, 1908, became the first city to adopt daylight saving time, and then that was quickly followed up by Orillia, Ontario, as well. Now, when we look at kind of daylight savings on a national scale, it was really World War I that kind of drove this progression. Germany and its ally Austria and Hungary shifted their clocks in 1916, in part to conserve the coal usage during the wartime, and many other countries then kind of followed suit along with them during that time. Now, some gave up the daylight savings post-war, but Canada, at least for one nation, has kept it ever since. Now, as interesting as that may be, I think more relevant is the several attempts that some countries have made to shift to permanent daylight saving time. And so that's where we shift 1 hour ahead from our standard time, which is what this referendum question is proposing. Now, just to be clear, when you look at the globe, it's split up into 24 different time zones, and where those time zones end up, that's what's considered standard time. And so, for example, Saskatchewan, they are on Central Standard Time year round. And so, what this referendum question though is proposing is that we shift from our standard time, which would be 1 hour behind where Saskatchewan is, if we were just going by international date lines, where we would be constantly 1 hour ahead of where we would normally be, ahead of 1 hour ahead of standard time. So this referendum question is proposing to go to permanent daylight saving time. So we're always 1 hour kind of shifted ahead of where we should be according to international time zones. Now, this shift to permanent daylight savings has happened in the past, but the short answer is this has not gone well where it has been tried. So the U.S. experimented with permanent daylight savings in 1974, and that experiment actually lasted only a year. They have tried it for a year and said, nope, this was good enough for us. We are going back. England, they were able to put up with it for at least 3 years, from 1968 to 1971. They put in year-round daylight saving time, and again, they went back in 71 back to standard time. Now, more recently, Russia tied Britain's 3-year run. They tried permanent daylight savings from 2011 to 2014. And quite remarkably, it apparently got so bad, and the population complained so much that even the Russian government had to listen to their people, and they went back to their standard time.
That's really saying something.
That should not go without notice. That the Russian people actually convinced the Russian government to do something. Like I said, yeah, that means something, I think, and then something we should be paying attention to. Now, in each of these attempts, the main complaint was largely the same. This is the fact that by shifting an hour ahead, it means that we are going to have later winter sunrises. So for Penhold, sunrise would be after 9 a.m. from November 18th to February 10th. So for about 4 months, you will not see the sun before 9 a.m. In the morning.
Yeah, that's pretty awful. And that's in one part of the province. You see it even worse in other sections of the province. So you just think what it's got to be like you're not seeing the sun until halfway through your morning.
Yeah, and and like you said, it only gets worse the more north and west you travel in the province.
Yeah, we're fairly central east-west. So you think that there's a good chunk of the province that's going to be even worse than Penhold.
Yeah, and I think you're mentioning something about Grand Prairie. Was it like I think
10:30 past 10:30 is the worst point of their winter.
Yeah, so for us in Penhold, sunrise or the latest sunrise would be on December 21st, and sunrise would occur at 9:42. 9:42 in the morning. And so, just think about this on a practical scale. This means that you will be sending your kids off to school, and they will be starting a good chunk of their morning classes in the complete dark. Likewise, workers will have to commute and begin work before sunrise. And that already kind of happens, I think, to a lot of people already living in Canada, given our northern status. Yeah. But now just add an extra hour to that darkness. And so when you these longer and darker mornings not only just lead to darker mornings when you're going to school in the dark or commuting in the dark, but these also, as the studies have shown, led to more car accidents because you are traveling at night during, or at least in the darkness. It's morning, but it's basically nighttime as far as it goes.
Your natural circadian rhythm is not going to catch up the same way. And so, yeah, you naturally have more people more tired at that hour. I say hour of the day. But that time of day, that time of the actual natural light cycle, you're going to have more people more tired, and it is a risk.
Yeah. So yeah, not only do you have the winter driving conditions in the dark already, but as you say, the later sunrises messes with when your body expects to be woken up.
Yeah.
And this is just kind of one of those things of modern society now, is that we are governed by the clock.
Yeah, we've shifted away from the natural rhythms of sunlight, dark, and so on, and shifted to we try to overcome those natural rhythms and schedule it ourselves. Mm-hmm. And you can only go so far. Your body responds to natural light, and so shifting it even further is not easy.
No, and so all these things kind of compiled, and as I point out, America has tried it, Britain has tried it, Russia has tried it. So these are all large scale experiments at permanent daylight saving, and they have not lasted. Now there are some places, I'll give it credit. There are some places where the later mornings do occur, and so places further north, like in the Yukon or even Regina, the peak of the sun is at 1 o'clock. So it's the time isn't exactly the same, and so there's a sense that they're sort of on daylight saving, but that's more of a geographical issue, whereas we are kind of willingly putting ourselves in a situation to I think really experience some unusual conditions that we just aren't accustomed to.
Yeah.
And so you wonder how long it just seems like it's such a silly question almost, about when do we set our clocks, but there's, I think, some serious ramifications.
Yeah. I think there's more to it than people realize.
Um, and so when we one of the or some of the arguments for the whole shifting of the clocks or against the shifting of the clocks is that it does lead to upsetting our normal rhythms. It does lead to productive or decreases in production and more car accidents. There's some health situations kind of tied to that. But those I sense are more kind of statistical um, findings. It's not like we wake up on daylight savings and experience more car accidents on a personal level.
Right.
This though on the shifting of the sunrise, I think is going to impact us a lot more than perhaps many people are anticipating.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think this deserves a little more thoughtfulness when we go to the ballot box, whether or not we are just trying to get rid of an inconvenience in shifting our clocks twice a year. And we really need to kind of think about what this extra darkness would mean if we do go to permanent daylight savings times. So it's at least something not to be considered lightly. So give it some thought. Maybe sleep on it.
Now, in support of it, my selfish side says I like the idea because in the winter where we live, I go to work in the dark anyway. I love the idea of having actual sunlight after I finish the work day rather than going to work in the dark and coming home in the dark. So I can see some appeal to it. I'm not sure that's enough reason to vote in favor, but it's something to consider.
Now, the second referendum question is about equalization. And it asks, again, a yes or no question. Should Section 36, subsection 2 of the Constitution Act 1982, Parliament and the Government of Canada's commitment to the principle of making equalization payments be removed from the Constitution? Now, I suppose here it's probably best that if we're going to talk about removing part of the Constitution, we should know what that part says. So here it is, Section 36, subsection 2 of the Canadian Constitution as it was written in 1982. It says, Parliament and the Government of Canada are committed to the principle of making equalization payments to ensure that provincial governments have sufficient revenues to provide reasonably comparable levels of public services at reasonably comparable levels of taxation. So, in other words, the provinces paid for by the government should be available across the provinces at comparable tax rates. So, for example, the education system in Alberta should be available in New Brunswick at comparable levels of service at comparable levels of taxation. So, if Alberta is able to provide a certain level of education, New Brunswick shouldn't have to tax their citizens at twice the rate in order to provide the same service. Everything should be on an even taxation level to equal service levels as much as possible.
Sounds fair and sounds like good intentions.
There is good intention. We are a country after all, and so there is some sense in which there is a collective that we should be sharing in, not unlike say the taxes being paid by someone in Lethbridge go partly to fund a road here in Penhold.
Yeah,
there's this sharing of taxes going on. But here, just to kind of clarify this equalization system that's in place, it has to be brought up that this isn't a provincial program. This isn't like Alberta is sending money over to Quebec or over to New Brunswick. This is a federal program. So all the taxes that the feds collect are all collected together and pooled together from all the provinces of all Canadians, and it's from that pool of money that is kind of distributed back out to the provinces. Now there's a few different programs that kind of put money back into the provinces. The health transfer payments and social transfer payments, those are given back to the provinces on a per capita basis. So that's based upon how many people you have in your populations of any given province. So everyone receives the same amount of money per person. And that those two programs, the health transfer payments and the social transfer payments, those totaled about $55 billion last year. Now, equalization is a little bit different. How that equalization payments are made on the basis of kind of two primary things. First is how much revenue can be collected through taxes in a province. And then to this is added how much revenue is generated by provinces' natural resources. So things like royalties are put into this. So when you look at a province like Alberta, if you apply the same tax rates to Alberta as you do to New Brunswick, you would collect more tax revenue from Alberta. There's just more income being brought in, more revenue being generated on a per capita basis, which means your tax percent would collect more money for the province and ultimately for the government. And so this is done across all the provinces. You figure out how much tax revenue you could gain and how much revenue is brought in through natural resources, and then you divide it or you average it out across the 10 provinces to kind of get a baseline amount of how much revenue could be brought in through the provinces, and then you compare that to what each province's tax revenue actually is. And so what you're going to find is that some provinces are over this average and some are below. In order to bring the have-not provinces, as they're often referred to, bring them up to this tax revenue average, these are where the equalization payments come in. They bring those provinces up to kind of this average level. So I think for it's just a simplified example, say there's a 10% tax applied to two provinces with equal population. Now that 10% tax collects $1 million in taxes from one province, but from the other one, it only collects $500,000. Now, if you were to average out what the tax revenue is for those two provinces, it would be $750,000. Now, in this scenario, this second province would then receive an equalization payment of $250,000. So it bring their $500,000 or $500,000 up to that $750,000 average, whereas the first province, the one that brought in $1 million, would actually receive nothing, and so this is the equalization payment simplified down. Hopefully that's clear.
I think that makes it pretty clear. It's obviously, like you say, it's simplified, but it makes it clear that the goal is just to bring everybody up to a baseline average level so that nobody's left way behind.
That's right. And
seems fair.
Yeah. And so, because otherwise the argument is, in order for these have-not provinces or these poorer provinces, in order to bring them up to, say, the same level as the richer ones, the ones that are bringing in more revenue, they would require higher taxes. And this would go against the equalization principle that's on the referendum ballot. Now, just to give you a sense of where some of this money is going, last year, about $20 billion were given out in equalization payments. So BC, Alberta, Ontario, and Newfoundland and Labrador all received no equalization payments. They're all considered have provinces. Newfoundland is actually a fairly recent one, within the last, I think, 10 to 15 years since they started developing their natural resources.
That would be largely resource-based.
Yeah, so they started to really develop their offshore oil drilling. And so that moved them into the have provinces. For the provinces that are receiving equalization payments, Prince Edward Island received $419 million. Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, and Manitoba, they all received about $2 million, a little over $2 billion. And then Quebec received over $13 billion. Now, remember, these payments, though, are given out on a per capita basis. And so this explains why Quebec receives such a large payment due to their large population. If you're looking at a per capita basis, Quebec is actually the lowest one, I believe, of the ones receiving equalization payments. PEI, I think, is up towards the top as far as how much they are receiving on a per capita basis.
would still seem that there must not be a lot of resource development in Quebec in order to boost them up a little bit if they're still receiving that kind of level of equalization.
It's certainly a big element of the equalization formula. And so remember that this question is about the kind of the equalization system as a whole.
Yeah.
It's not about changing the formula that kind of determines what these equalization payments are for. So I think it's a really important element
Yeah.
of this.
Yeah. I think the idea of either we keep it or we scrap it doesn't seem to cover all of the intricacies of this system. The system doesn't sound bad. We have a tendency to look at certain provinces. We look at Quebec receiving a huge amount of money while other provinces are receiving none, and it seems unfair. But I think there's a lot more intricacies to this than just we keep it or we get rid of it.
Yeah, it's certainly this idea of unfairness is certainly kind of probably the most popular argument, especially in Alberta when we've seen our economy struggle over the last few years, particularly tied to the lower oil prices, and yet we still see Quebec receiving $13 billion in equalization payments. It certainly does raise our sense of what is that all about? Like,
yeah,
we need that money here, don't we? And then this sense of unfairness is just further compounded by Quebec's rejection of pipelines that would ultimately benefit the Alberta economy, which is what is the main driver for this whole equalization payment system.
Right.
And so, yeah, I get it. This is there is certainly something to be said for this, at least face value sense of unfairness in the system. Now, I think in regards to this, it has to be said that the equalization payment is, first of all, paid out by taxes collected by the federal government. So I don't think it's fair to say that $13 billion of Alberta money is being thrown into Quebec, or $2 billion is given to New Brunswick from Alberta. That's really not how it works. It's again pooled cash from across the country.
Yeah.
So if we're getting criticized, let's try to do it accurately at least. Now, that said, it is equally true though that Alberta contributes more per capita than these other have-not provinces. That's what makes us have province. We generate a lot of tax revenue that gets put into the pool in the middle of the table that the federal government then dishes out. And so a significant amount of the billions of dollars that are given out in Quebec, or given out in equalization payments, a significant portion is certainly as a result of the taxes that are brought in through Alberta taxpayers. Now, I think at this point, though, it's important to realize that the equalization payments aren't meant to kind of adjust rapidly to changes in any particular economy, per provincial economy. And so when Alberta saw this significant dip in its economy, it's not the equalization payments that we should be looking towards. There's actually another program. It's called the Financial Stabilization Program. It's, again, another federal program from that pool of money that it collects from us on a federal level that's given back to provinces to stabilize their economies, especially during severe swings in it. So what this program does is that whenever a provincial economy dips below 5% year on year, the federal government gives them money to keep them at that level. So a provincial government should never, or provincial economy should never dip more than 5% over a year, because whenever it does, the federal government then gives you that money to kind of keep you up. And so it's kind of meant to even out those fluctuations, which is really what I think a lot of the kind of the animosity or the unfairness that we sense. Again, we look at Quebec receiving all these billions. Alberta economy is struggling. Why? How is that? How is that fair? That's certainly a question that we'll look at in a second. But where we should be looking to make up some of those lost funds is through the stabilization program, and Alberta certainly has received significant funds from this program, but because of certain cap restrictions, which I won't get into at this moment, it hasn't received as much as it could have. But that's where perhaps the focus should be on, is on the stabilization program instead of the equalization program. It's the stabilization program that helps provinces when it has severe swings in the economy.
Well, and you were saying earlier that there's a lag time with the calculations for the equalization. There's also an averaging of 3 years that it's calculated from. So yeah, like you said, when we see these bad years in Alberta where oil prices have dipped dramatically and we're bringing in far less revenue, the equalization was never designed to compensate for that type of a downturn in the economy. Like, so yes, something like the financial stabilization, that is supposed to be where we're looking.
Yeah, that's where
instead we look at these things like the equalization and think, well, where's our equalization?
Yeah, it's at least on a political level, it's easier to gin up support when you can point to a province that is already seemingly against a lot of the interests of Alberta and show that they are receiving $13 billion and claim that's all Alberta money. Again, not exactly true, but it certainly sells better on kind of the political messaging scene.
Yeah.
But really, I think where the focus should be on is on the stabilization program and whether or not that is being fully utilized to help out Alberta. So certainly something to keep in mind. Now, just go back to this kind of idea of unfairness. I think regarding the equalization program, I think there is something to be said for the fact that the equalization system, in principle, has kind of a built-in unfairness to it. When I'm paying for groceries or taxes, I deserve a fair return in value for my money. The tricky part, though, is that when I'm measuring value I'm getting for taxes, is much more difficult than simply looking into my shopping cart. If I spent $100 at the shopping cart or at the grocery store, I can look in my cart and say, yes, I got good value for that. It's not so clean and simple when it comes to taxes.
Yeah.
Especially when those are being collected over such a large area of people. Like I said, the province or taxes are being pooled across the provinces, across the country, and so it's difficult to say what we are being given back in return, particularly when it comes to equalization. And so those in favor of equalization will argue that part of the value that a province receives in participating in the equalization program is control over its natural resources, and so if equalization were to be removed, perhaps natural resources now become nationalized. Maybe that is the next step in it, because you can't I don't think expect to pull back on the equalization payments and not expect expect everything else to remain the same.
Right.
There's just too many things tied together with this. After all, we are a country. There is some bond that ties us together more than simply a name. It's not surprising that we find some financial entanglements.
Yeah.
And so when you are threatening to withdraw from that program, there are going to be, I think, other threads that might be pulled on that. And so one of those threads that could be challenged is a province's ability to control its natural resources. And so during the boom years, we in Alberta really liked that. We didn't have too much problem with equalization payment at that time. We were happy and satisfied and quite enjoying the fruits of our oil labor, as it were. but when things have gone difficult, gone south as far as the natural resources payment or resources go, then yeah, we all of a sudden feel like we've been unfairly treated, and so we have to be careful. I think when we're considering this question, it's a yes or no question on the payment on the equalization system itself, and not merely just a kind of a rejiggering of the formula that's used in calculating it. So we need to be careful about what we might get ourselves into if we do withdraw from it. It's something that's tough to kind of point a finger to, but it's certainly something that we need to be aware of. This is not an isolated program that you can just remove and everything else stays where it is. It's a federal program, and so it's going to be tied into a lot of different things.
Yeah, there's a lot of provinces that rely on that income, and you pull that away from them, and that leaves them in a situation where tax rates have to go up, or utilizing resources potentially in damaging ways becomes the only viable option for their economy to survive. It's a risky thing to just pull out from under them.
When the kind of one of the arguments is that when you do pull out from the equalization payment, it creates such a financial imbalance. Is that you creates a situation where population shifts happen due to the fact that public services are better over in one province than the other.
Yes.
And so that ends up creating an even further undercutting of what kind of revenue a province could reap. And it can create, I think, some significant consequences and population shifts.
Yeah.
If there isn't some sort of equalization. Now, certainly you need some sort of competition between provinces. I think that's healthy. But the revenue that Alberta gains simply for its geographical position, that's the thing. It's not policy. So it's not so much a policy advantage that equalization is really trying to get at. It's the fact that there's some just luck of the draw geographical benefits that a lot of provinces have.
Yeah, and I think this idea of unfairness, it can be taken to all the different levels. Like, we look at it and say how it's unfair between Alberta and the have-not provinces out east, but you can say the same thing on a provincial level. It's unfair between central Alberta and southern Alberta, or varying levels. So at some point you have to recognize we are a part of Canada, so there has to be some cooperation between the provinces. So from my perspective, I don't think that the unfairness argument is particularly valid, because you can drill that down right to the local taxes, and it's going to be the same thing. We pay taxes to the provincial government, and the province distributes them to the areas that need it.
Yeah.
So
yeah, it's at least on a principle level. It's the fact that the taxes are distributed across the provinces, across the province, and federal taxes are distributed across the country in perhaps different, in unequal ways, or at least something like that. It doesn't seem like that is enough of a reason to get rid of the equalization as a whole, because it does apply. It does happen on all levels. I think is probably what I'm getting at. Yes, I agree that this kind of sense of equalization kind of happens naturally across different scales, different levels. What I think we might be more or what might be a wiser course is to maybe figure out what's the most fair formula to use when it comes to these payments.
Yes, and that's where I don't think this should be a yes or no question. I don't think this should be a referendum question asking whether we should keep it or get rid of it. It should be a question of whether we keep it as is or whether this needs attention.
Yeah, and that kind of leads into another argument against equalization is that it acts as a disincentive for these have-not provinces to develop their natural resources. And so we often look at Alberta as being blessed with certain natural resources,
Yes.
particularly oil. Key, though, is that just because Alberta has a lot of oil, it doesn't mean that these other provinces don't have any other natural resources. And then that is certainly the case. There is a lot, and Newfoundland and Labrador is a clear example in the last 15, 20 years of a province that finally decided that they are going to take advantage of those natural resources,
Yes.
even if it does get rid of our equalization payments.
Yeah.
And that's true. Even with some of these smaller provinces, there's a lot of natural resources that are just left there, not being developed. And part of it is because of the equalization formula. Consider that PEI, Nova Scotia, and New Brunswick, 20% of their provincial revenue is based upon equalization payments.
It takes a significant commitment to those resources to make up that difference.
Yeah. Are you going to kind of take a gamble on that almost guaranteed 20% in order to kind of try to develop what is often volatile, environmentally and politically risky venture into natural resources?
Yeah.
That's where I think the issue, something like that, where this kind of has maybe a disincentivizing element to it, could perhaps be taken up in a changing in the formula. I don't have necessarily what a change would be, but I think something that is more appropriately addressed in changing kind of the calculus in the formula regarding natural resources and how that's kind of weighted in developing equalization. And it can be done without having to undo equalization as a whole.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, when you go into the ballot box, there is certainly, I think, an emotional component that just wants to be rid of this equalization thing, that we want to keep our tax money and tax dollars here. I don't know if that is really what the end result would end up being. After all, this is a federal program.
Yeah.
It doesn't, just because we stop the equalization system doesn't mean that the feds are going to stop collecting that tax.
Yeah.
There's nothing that forces them to do that. And so just consider the equalization system as a whole, what Alberta's role is as one member of the country, what our role is what our role can be or should be in helping out other provinces, and perhaps how we can adjust the formula to make this a more agreeable and fair system. But remember, this isn't a binding question. This is a constitutional question, and so all this is going to do, if it is voted yes, is give the provincial government kind of the political capital and directive to argue against or argue with the federal government in trying to create some change here. So, ultimately, I don't think even a yes one is going to change, or is going to get rid a yes vote for removing the federal, or to remove the clause, is going to change the Constitution. I think if anything, this is just going to give political power or capital to our provincial government to perhaps force changes in the formula, perhaps something like that.
Yeah.
And so with that, thank you for joining us on today's show. If you have any thoughts or comments, please leave them in the comment section. We'd love to hear from you. I am Brian Constantine.
And I am Michael Rowland.
And this is Penhold Talk Radio.